Just before we jump into today's video, I do want to say that it's sponsored by our fantastic friends over at Squarespace, who will allow you to build a brand and grow your business online. And Squarespace allow you to do it all in one place. From beautiful websites to engaging with your audience, even selling products and services, Squarespace has got you covered. But what really stands out to me about Squarespace is three incredible features. First of all, there's member areas, which makes it easy to monetize your content and expertise. You can sell access to your online courses, classes, or newsletters, all while freeing up more time in your schedule. Plus, with Squarespace's email campaigns, you can stand out in any inbox. You can collect email subscribers and convert them into loyal customers. The built-in analytics also mean that the impact of every send is measured and, well, analytics, very useful. And finally, Squarespace's connected social media accounts feature is a game changer. Display posts from your social profiles on your website and automatically push content to your favorite social media channels. Kill two birds with one stone. So if you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/brainfood for a free trial. When you're ready to purchase, use the promo code BRAINFOOD to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. And now, into it. Of all the major military conflicts of the 20th century, the Second World War stands apart. Not only was it the deadliest conflict in modern history, claiming an estimated 85 million lives, or about 1 in every 25 people, but it was also arguably history's first truly technological war. While many now ubiquitous military technologies, such as aircraft, tanks, and submarines, saw their combat debut in the First World War, it was during the Second that they were refined into truly effective weapons, along with other key innovations such as radar, guided missiles, and nuclear weapons. One of the less glamorous, but nonetheless important developments of the war was the use of parachutes to rapidly deliver troops and equipment behind enemy lines, a technique that proved instrumental in dozens of operations, from the German invasion of the Low Countries in 1940 to the Allied D-Day landings in 1944. But the parachutes at the time had their limitations. They could not be steered, and they delivered their payloads to the ground slowly, making them vulnerable to drifting off target and being damaged by anti-aircraft fire. In an attempt to solve this problem and make airborne delivery faster and more accurate, in 1944, the British Admiralty conducted a series of bizarre experiments to explore the use of retro rockets to slow the descent of falling payloads, eliminating the need for parachutes altogether. This is the story of Agile, one of the Second World War's most intriguing and hilariously unsuccessful secret weapons. The Agile project was undertaken by the British Admiralty's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, or DMWD, founded in 1941 as an offshoot of the Inspectorate of Anti-Aircraft Weapons and Devices. In true cheeky British fashion, the name was soon corrupted to the Instigator of Anti-Aircraft Wheezers and Dodges, creating the DMWD's enduring nickname of the Wheezers and Dodgers. In any event, the DMWD was one of the many similar groups established by the British early in the war, leveraging the unique talents of a ragtag group of scientists, engineers, and other eccentric misfits to develop creative and often bizarre solutions to difficult wartime problems. Over its brief 4-year history, the DMWD would employ a number of colorful characters, including motor racing photographer Louis Kamantaski, engineer Barnes Wallace, inventor of the bouncing bomb used in the famous 1943 Dam Busters raid, and engineer Neville Shute Norway, later to become famous as the author of novels like On the Beach and A Town Like Alice. Headed by Canadian chemist Charles Goodeye and headquartered at HMS Burnbeck, a converted pier at Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, DMWD tackled all sorts of unconventional projects, including radar countermeasures and ship camouflage, amphibious assault techniques, anti-submarine weapons, and of course, Agile. The concept behind Agile was straightforward enough. Instead of a parachute, air-dropped payloads were fitted with a set of downward-facing cordite solid-fuel rockets, which were fired just before impact, quickly slowing the payload and delivering it safely to the ground. This would allow the payload to freefall for most of its descent, allowing it to be more accurately dropped onto landing zones and protecting it from enemy fire. In practice, however, this scheme proved anything but simple to pull off. One of the key technical difficulties of the concept was how to reliably trigger the rockets at the exact right moment. Too late and the payload would either plow into the ground at terminal velocity or bounce back into the air, while too early and it would pick up enough additional speed after to be damaged by impact. To solve this problem, the boffins at the DMWD developed a plumb bob that hung a certain distance below the payload and would fire the rockets as soon as it touched the ground. Initial trials were conducted by simply dropping a concrete block fitted with rockets from a tall crane. Unfortunately, the project got off to an inauspicious start as the first block, fitted with too few rockets, simply buried itself in the ground while also being dramatically engulfed in a wreath of flame and smoke. Witnessing the impressive spectacle, one of the observers, Captain G.O.C. Davies, exclaimed, "Look at it, it's Elijah in reverse," referring to the biblical prophet who ascended to heaven in a chariot of fire. This resulted in the project being officially dubbed Agile, or literally Elijah in reverse. Moving on to the second drop, this ended much like the first, while in the third the engineers fitted the block with too many rockets, causing it to launch several dozen feet into the air before crashing back to the ground. These early tests also revealed the difficulties inherent in designing a reliable reliable triggering device for the plumb bob had to be simultaneously heavy enough not to be blown upward by strong winds during descent and sensitive enough to detect soft terrain like long grass. Following these disappointing trials, the Hajile team decided to conduct all further experiments over the sea, which would not only provide an ideal flat surface to test triggering devices, but also hopefully allow test rigs to be recovered intact. For these water-based tests, rather than a crane, the test articles were dropped from a Lancaster heavy bomber, much as they would be once Hajile entered service. Unfortunately, the first few drops landed too far away to be successfully recorded, so the engineers asked the Lancaster pilot to drop the next payload closer to the pier. I mean, what could go wrong with that? To their horror, the pilot took their request a little too literally, as team member Gerald Paulet later recalled. As Hajile came screaming through the air, the watchers on the pier gazed open-mouthed. Then, suddenly realizing that it was going to score a direct hit, everyone started running for dear life down the long plank roadway. The concrete bomb landed squarely on the roof of WWII's engineering shop. It sheared through a massive steel joist and then demolished the covered way leading to the steamer jetty. Happily, there were no casualties, though the WREN, the WRNS, Women's Royal Naval Service cooks preparing lunch a few feet from the wrecked shelter, thought that the end of the world had come. So, whoops-a-daisy. Following the hair-raising incident, the Hajile team finally began to make some progress when they increased the number of rockets from 4 to 8. In this configuration, the test blocks came to a complete stop just a few feet above the water before sinking slowly beneath the surface. Buoyed by this encouraging success, the Hajile team decided to move on from concrete blocks to actual payloads and attempted to convince the Royal Navy to provide them with a number of jeeps for testing. Understandably, the Navy was skeptical about risking perfectly good vehicles on such an unproven and potentially destructive device, and the DMWD was forced to procure its jeeps from the United States Navy instead. Unfortunately, the Royal Navy's fears were well founded, as the first test drop ended in spectacular failure. Snowfall had dampened the rocket fuses, causing the rockets to fail, and the jeep hit the ground at terminal velocity, completely destroying it. After 2 weeks of tinkering, the team was ready to try again. This time, the rockets fired right on cue, but when the smoke cleared, the team discovered the jeep lying upside down. Further tests were no more successful, with the system proving maddeningly difficult to get working reliably. As for the flipping issue, one major problem was the difficulty of getting the primitive cordite rockets to ignite simultaneously, a shortcoming that caused many test articles to flip over or tumble end over end. Moving on from there, matching the thrust of the rockets to the weight of the payload also proved tricky, leading to many payloads crashing to the ground at high speed or being launched erratically back into the air. Ultimately, while the team came tantalizingly close to perfecting the system, the end of Hajile finally came on June 6, 1944, the day of the D-Day landings, when an electrician accidentally triggered the rockets on a test rig while the engineering team was gathered around it. The resulting blast injured several people, including photographer Louis Kamatsky, who was blinded for several days after receiving a blast of sand to the eyes. With the strategic need for Hajile quickly fading, the project was temporarily shelved and then abandoned completely as the war and the DMWD came to an end. The hilarious failure of Hajile aside, the DMWD did make a great many useful contributions to the war effort, developing such devices as the Hedgehog and Squid anti-submarine mortars, methods for protecting ships against magnetic mines, and the Mulberry floating harbors used during the D-Day landings. However, on the other end of things, the Hajile was not the only of the DMWD's bizarre misfires. Among the group's more eccentric undertakings was a scheme called Kentucky Minstrels, which sought to disguise reflective rivers and canals used by German bombers as navigation aids at night as roads by coating them in a substance derived from coal dust. While the actions of wind and tide ultimately made the scheme impractical, on at least one occasion the effect proved remarkably convincing when a man out walking his dog at night mistook a camouflage canal for an asphalt road and ended up unexpectedly soaked. But perhaps the Wheezers and Dodgers' most bizarre creation was the Great Panjandrum, a giant rocket-propelled explosive wheel designed to be launched from a landing craft, rapidly roll up an invasion beach, and then destroy coastal defenses with a bang. Like Hajile, Pandandrum was a spectacular failure, but that's a subject for another video. Another related wartime project was the Jumping Tank, an attempt to use rockets to make light armored vehicles like the Valentine tank and Universal Carrier leap over obstacles like canals or anti-tank ditches. Needless to say, this insane concept proved completely unworkable and the project was quickly scrapped. Interestingly, while Hajile proved an abject failure, the concept of slowing airdropped payloads using retro rockets was later revived and successfully implemented, albeit as an enhancement rather than a replacement for parachutes. For example, ever since the first manned spaceflight by Yuri Gagarin in 1961, the Soviet Union and later the Russian Federation have opted to recover their space capsules on land rather than at sea like the American space program. There are several reasons for this. Firstly, unlike the Americans, the Russians do not possess a large enough naval surface fleet to perform efficient ocean recoveries. Secondly, during the Cold War, having spacecraft land within Russia's vast territory made them less likely to be captured by the enemy. However, this recovery method brought with it a key safety issue. Achieving a ground landing soft enough to prevent the cosmonauts from being injured required a parachute far larger than could be carried in the cramped capsule. The Vostok capsule flown by Gagarin solved this problem by having the cosmonaut eject and land separately from the spacecraft. However, the later Voskhod and Soyuz capsules landed with their crew still inside and used a system of solid fuel retro rockets to lessen the impact speed. On the Voskhod capsule, these rockets were mounted on the parachute shroud lines, while on the Soyuz, which is still in use today, they are located under the heat shield, which is jettisoned just prior to landing. These 6 rockets are triggered by a gamma-ray altimeter codenamed Cactus 2V between 1.1 and 0.8 meters from the ground, slowing the capsule from around 10 meters per second to around 2.5, resulting in a relatively light impact cosmonauts describe as a light thump. However, as it is possible that the retro rockets may fail, the crew couches are designed to withstand the impact of landing under only a parachute, though it is a decidedly less comfortable experience. In the 1970s, the Soviets also developed a Hagile-like landing system for the BMD-1, a lightweight armored fighting vehicle designed for use by airborne troops. Weighing only 7.5 tons, the BMD-1 can be carried by nearly any Russian transport aircraft and a handful of heavy-lift helicopters and airdropped using a large multi-canopy cargo parachute. As this parachute lowered the vehicle at a bone-crunching 15 to 20 meters per second, or about 65 kilometers per hour or 40 miles per hour, the original operational doctrine called for the BMD-1 and its crew to be dropped separately onto the battlefield. In practice, however, the two tended to drift and land far apart, making it difficult for the crew to find and reach the vehicle. The Soviets thus began experimenting with dropping the BMD-1 with the driver and gunner aboard, using a system of retro rockets mounted on a drop pallet to slow the vehicle's impact speed to a more reasonable 7 meters per second. Other crew members who dropped separately were given radio receivers tuned to a beacon on the vehicle, allowing them to easily locate their mount after landing. The system entered service in 1975 and is still in use today, validating the Hagile principle some 30 years after the fact.